Thank you. So, a little background. I've been on the faculty here in the business school since 2007. What I'm going to show you today is a system that we use for teaching Microsoft Excel and Access. We also have it written for PowerPoint and Word, although we don't teach that here at BYU. But what's going to be of real interest to you is going to be the data that we collect in terms of the process. What we have the opportunity to do is to see how students go about completing assignments. And so that's where I'm headed. But I want to give you the overall kind of look of the system so that you can understand the context that this all fits in. We had a problem in time it was called IS 101. We were teaching Excel. And that was, we were using a product that was a simulation. We were teaching large sections. One section, 250 students, another section, 800 students. And to teach that many students and to be able to give them feedback, you need to have some kind of system that allows to automate that feedback. We just couldn't hire enough TAs to go through and grade students' submissions and to give them timely feedback. And of course, when you have lots of different TAs where they're not going to give consistent feedback, and so we needed a way to be able to give consistent feedback quickly, and we were using a product that was offered by one of the major textbook publishers, Pearson, called My IT Lab, which was a simulation. You didn't even really work in Excel. You went to a web page, and any of you familiar with My IT Lab here? A few of you are. You didn't even work in Excel. You went to a web page, and it kind of looked like Excel. Well, it looked a lot like Excel, and as long as you kind of stayed on the script they wanted you to do, it behaved like Excel, but if you got very far off that script, it just wouldn't work. It was very dissatisfying to the students. And the biggest problem for us in their learning is that they were, in that environment, they were kind of able to click their way to the right answer. You know, kind of click around and see what actually works. Oh, that part works. And so that's getting us, to what I'm supposed to do. And so in 2011, my co-author, Nick Ball, he's now at Utah Valley University, was handed this class. The guy who was teaching before retired and said, listen, Professor Ball, this class is yours. You got to get us teaching Excel in Excel. Get us out of this simulation. And by the way, you don't get any more resources. No more TAs, whatever. You've got 4 TAs, 1,000 students a semester, and we want them working in Excel and giving real feedback. And so Nick came to me. I've been doing automatic grading in Excel for my Visual Basic for Applications programming class for about a decade. And he said, hey, can we do that stuff you're doing in the programming class just for like the introductory level to Excel? And I said, yeah, that'd be a lot easier than the stuff I'm trying to do. And so in 2011, we started down this road. And so the end solution is an e-textbook. It's published by a startup company called My Educator. It's founded by a BYU professor and a USU professor. They're Heaven Be brothers. And this particular course has 10 chapters of Excel content and 4 chapters of Microsoft Access content. And so this is the material that we are teaching in the business program, the information systems department, saying you need to be up to speed kind of with the basic technology as you come in the door at the business school. And so that's what the context is for this. In terms of an online textbook, there's nothing that's all that revolutionary or gripping here. There's inline videos that have 100% overlap with the text. But then the part that I think is going to be most interesting to you folks is that as we get partway down through this, we have what we refer to as a practice problem. In this case, the student downloads an Excel workbook and then works through the problem on their machine. I'll show you that here in just a moment. These practice problems that are kind of in the chapters, we actually provide a video of the professor working through the problem and then text by text or step-by-step text and images about how that would be solved. But when we get to the very last segment of the chapter, it's just an assessment. And I can see that I've already submitted this assessment for myself. So I think I get 2 submissions. That'll be okay. So the idea is we download this. The student downloads that file and then opens that file on their computer. So let me go ahead and open up that file. It's not exactly the one I downloaded, but I think it should be functionally equivalent to the one I downloaded. We're doing all kinds of crazy things with Visual Basic for Applications. How many of you, when I say VBA, how many of you are going, I have no idea what you're talking about? Okay, good. So VBA, most folks don't know that built into Excel is a very robust programming environment. We can make Excel applications using this language, Visual Basic for Applications. And so you can also do evil things with VBA. And in the early days of VBA, back in the late 1990s, people did evil things. In fact, far and away, the most prolific viruses of the late 90s were what we refer to today as macro viruses. They were just, someone wrote a macro in a workbook or a Word document, and it would propagate itself without the user knowing it. They would open up the workbook and kind of crazy things would happen on their computer. So Microsoft has said, okay, listen, if you're going to be downloading a workbook that's got active content in it, then we want to make sure you know what you're doing. So the user has to say, yeah, I want to enable, yeah, this came from the internet. Okay, we're okay with that. And then it says, hey, there's macros here. Are you sure you want to do this? Okay, yeah, we do. But at this point, we're doing several things with that VBA while the students are working on this assignment, as we're tracking what they do. And so it has to be enabled. The whole idea behind the current implementations of Excel is that you can say, you know what, don't turn on the macros. And in that case, we wouldn't be able to see what they're doing. And so we take the assessment that we're giving them, we hide all the worksheets, and we give them one worksheet that just says, you got to turn on your macros. And until they turn on their macros, they can't even see the assignment. But at the moment where they say, yeah, go ahead and enable this content, then the workbook reconfigures itself and it shows then the information that the student needs to work with. Over here then on the, so what we do for students to be able to understand the assignment, they download the workbook, and at that point they no longer need to be connected to the internet to work on this assignment. So they're commuting on the train or whatever, they can work on it just fine. But we need to give them a way to be able to see to kind of interact with the whole system, to be able to see the instructions and so forth. So we built a tab into the workbook that's just called, it's the assignment tab. It's got 4 buttons on it that students use to be able to see what they're working on. The first one just shows the instructions for the assignment. It brings it up in a web browser, but if you look closely up there, it's a local file. So what this workbook has done is it's generated a local HTML file and then just said show this with the default browser, and that's what the student's looking at here. So in this particular assessment, we have, I think, 4 different things. This is the, I even forget what this one's called. Like the conditionals, and logic and reference. This is the logic and reference assignment. So we're talking about Boolean logic, we're dealing with the AND function, the OR function, the NOT function. We're giving them some specific steps that we want them to complete in the context of this workbook. Now the vast majority of the assignments that we do here are we're in the business school, they're business examples. This one happens to be from baseball. How many of you understand the infield fly rule in baseball? Yeah, like one of you. Me too. Yeah, I had no idea what the infield fly. I had no idea there was such a rule. Apparently, if you got a bunch of runners on base, I'm going to try to explain the rule. So the point is, the infield fly rule depends. It only comes into play under certain conditions. When a catchable fly ball is hit to the infield and there's runners in certain positions, then the batter is automatically declared out. And so, anyway. This is just a context where we're saying, we're trying to find out, hey, is there a force out at third? And the information that we're working with, is there a runner on second and a runner on first? And so if there's a runner on first and a runner on second, then there's a force out at third. That's the whole idea. This is kind of part of what you have to do to be able to calculate, does the infield fly rule come into effect here? And so the user then kind of has to say, okay, here's the first task. Use the AND function to determine if there's a force out at third. Now what we learned pretty quickly on, and this is the kind of stuff that I think you guys study over here. We're just trying to make an assignment for students to work with. But the process of going back and forth between this textual representation and some of the ones that are dealing with multiple fields or cells. We've got to map K11, I11, J11, H11. So there's a lot of mapping that's happening in here over to this workbook to be able to really understand what are we trying to do with that. It's a fairly cognitively intense process for students to do that. And this whole mapping, trying to understand what we're talking about here in the context of this workbook, really has nothing to do with their learning of Excel. It's like extraneous cognitive load that we would love to get rid of so that they can use as much brain power as they're bringing to the table to be able to solve the Excel problem. And that's the reason that we created this thing called the task guide. The task guide brings the same information that we have over here in the full description of the assignment, but just one part at a time. So here's the context for this particular part, and then as we navigate forward, here's that very first task. It's exactly the same text that we have right here. It's just brought here in a window that floats on Excel. the user can leave that up and they can come and actually fill their, build their formulas in here. As they navigate forward, we highlight the different parts of the workbook that are relevant for that particular task. And then ultimately, once they get past that task set, it advances them to the next sheet and they're ready to work on this one. I'm going to work on a couple of these examples just to kind of show you what it's like here. I'm going to zoom in here a bit. So here's more of a business context. It's a donut shop. This is a example that's near and dear to my heart. Beverly, she's selling donuts at the local bakery, and we've got to figure out how much are we charging per donut. And it depends on how many donuts they're ordering, right? So if they order 12 or more, they're 40 cents each. If they order less than a dozen, they're 50 cents each. We then have various other things that we're trying to calculate commission rates. And so if she can talk these guys into ordering a beverage, she gets a different commission. If she can get the order up to a higher level, she gets a higher percentage of it and so forth. The last example here is that Beverly just has this calculation for herself. If she manages to earn more than $40 in commissions, she rewards herself by buying a donut herself. And so that's all this is. It's just, hey, did you earn more than $40 in commission? If so, buy a donut. So that's what these tasks are going to take us through doing here. Gripping as it may be, to watch me fill out formulas, I'm going to copy them for you. So here's the first one. In fact, I'm going to give myself a little error in this one. Let's see if we can see it here. So in this formula, we're looking here at the if formula. And the idea here is that if C18, column C, the number of donuts purchased is more than 12, then it's one price, this price, otherwise it's this price. What's the error in this formula? We're charging 40 cents when?
Greater than 12.
Yeah, it should be when it's greater than, when it's 12 or more, and this formula is showing greater than 12. And so this is going to be off on the condition when it is exactly 12 donuts. Other than that, it's going to work okay. It's a common error that students make. I'm going to leave that error just so you can get a feeling for one of the big problems that we have, especially grading worksheets by hand. The whole idea behind electronic spreadsheet is to have kind of a set of formulas. So I change one formula, all the downstream formulas change. I don't have to go and redo those calculations. It happens automatically. And so I'm going to make an error here that's going to have a downstream problem, and we'll see how we deal with it. We've got a couple other formulas here, and again, I'm just going to copy these in. Copy that one down. This is some commission rate. And we've got some commission for the beverages. Okay, this one, I'm going to copy this one a different way. I'm going to suppose that I just couldn't quite figure this one out. And it's getting time close to submit, and my buddy is doing his assignment, Jacob is doing his assignment here on the same machine. And I'm just going to open up his workbook, and I'm going to copy his formula and paste that. The idea here is that, this is the kind of copying that students do, not students at our university, but at other universities. A student, who is kind of feeling the pressure of, not having time to complete this assignment might actually do that. I want to kind of show you how we deal with that. All right. And then I've only completed now the tasks on one of these four worksheets. This is the kind of the summative assessment for this chapter. So we're dealing with several different things here. At some point, the student says, great, I am ready to submit this thing. One of the great things that we can do, because we've got VBA running right here while the student's working, is we can say, listen, before we submit, we made a few checks, and we think there's some problems here. It looks like you haven't completed all the tasks on the Boolean function sheet. Well, that's right, I haven't done any of them. Same thing on these other ones. And so it's a very nice thing for us to be able to kind of look at it before the student submits and say, are you really sure you want to submit this? Because you're going to lose a bunch of points if you submit it just like this. I don't know if this happens in your domain. It's pretty common actually in our domain where we're dealing with electronic files. The student would submit, like they would download the file, and they would submit the same thing they downloaded without making any changes to it. A couple of days later, Professor, why did I get a 0 on that assignment? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look. We bring it. You got a 0 because you didn't do anything. Oh my gosh, I did it, but I must have turned in the wrong file. Did that happen to you over here? Happens occasionally. That was pretty common. It doesn't happen anymore for us. That was kind of nice. Well, what did you do? And it said you weren't going to get any points, and you clicked yes. You want to submit anyway. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and submit. At this point, I have to authenticate. And at this point, I need to be connected because now we're about to grade the workbook, and we're going to send the results back up to the central server. So gove.allen@gmail.com, double secret password. We'll say OK. What happens then is that the workbook contacts the server, and it shouldn't give me an error. Do not access. Oh, apparently I've put this in some place I don't have access to write text. Hold on for just a second. Let me just move this to like my desktop. I think I have access on the desktop. Save as, this P, browse, documents, view my documents. Is that where it is? Welcome to my desktop. No note here.
This PC, it's like, there you go.
PC desktop. Thank you. Let's try that there. Go through that process again. Hopefully they'll spit okay. Recording score and coding file. That looks a little better. Mission complete. There we go. Okay. We'll talk about this feedback here in just a second. So what happened during that process? Architecturally, this is interesting, probably not critical to you. One of the problems that we used to have is that when we would have 1,000 students coming up against a common deadline, whenever we had a centralized server that was bearing the load, the system would like almost crawl to a halt. So when we were working with this simulation, things due at midnight. We have a substantial number of our students start somewhere in the 11th hour, literally in the 11th hour. And if we have a lot of them, and especially if there was another large school hitting up against that same deadline, the system would like grind to a crawl. And I'd come in and get like 200 emails in the morning. Hey, I've got almost a half hour before this thing's due. I'm just getting started, and it's just so slow that I can't work with it. So what we said when we set this approach up was we said, listen, we've got to distribute the workload. And so the grading engine that actually evaluates the student's work is built into the workbook that the student downloads. And so when they say submit, we request a rubric. The rubric comes down from the server, and the workbook itself, then the workbook grades itself, which means that every student that brings more demand to the system also brings along the capacity to service that demand. And so this distributed approach just works well for dealing with large numbers of students. It grades it, so it grades itself, it communicates the results back to the server, then it uploads the file to the server, and then it presents the results to the student. It just routes them back here to their account on the platform. Then what we're able to do here is we are able now to give some very specific feedback. And this first set of tasks, I didn't do anything. But this will give you a sense for some of the things that we're looking at here. So there were 9 points allocated to this, none of which I received. And the feedback tells me, why I didn't receive it. We stopped short of actually showing the student's answer. We stopped short of showing the correct answer to the student. The whole idea here is to let them make an attempt. If they don't quite get it right, give them immediate feedback, let them learn from their feedback, and go back and make another attempt. And so we give them feedback that says, listen, you're supposed to use a particular function, and that function isn't here. The assignment says use the AND function. We look, there's no AND, there's nothing there actually. There's no AND function, and so you didn't use the right function. But then, for this particular assignment, most of the rest of the grading that we do here is, what we're saying is, we're not that concerned about how you use the AND function, as long as it produces the correct answer. It produces the correct answer given specific values in the antecedent cells. So that as long as this behaves correct, when we place different values in the antecedent cells, and what we're seeing here is that we've actually, during the grading process, we changed the antecedent cells and said, how does your function behave? It's not giving us the correct answer when C11 is yes and D11 is yes, when C11 is no and D11 is no, and it kind of goes through that whole set. So if they've got something that almost works, we tell them the conditions where it doesn't work, but we don't tell them how to fix it. But they get a chance to go through and then work on their own. So let's come down and look at the part of the assignment that I did. Okay, so here's that first one where we're trying to figure out the price per donut. And this environment actually brings in the formula that the student, this is what the student gave. That's mostly for the instructor who's looking at this to be able to say, oh, I can just see what the student did in this cell without having to download their workbook. I got 4 out of the 5 points. The only deficiency here was that I wasn't handling the boundary condition exactly right. And so that's the feedback we give. The value in E18 is not correct. We're looking specifically where we're talking about equal to 12. It was that boundary that was just a little bit off. And so we give them most of the credit here and let them know there's some work that can be done. The interesting thing down here is that even though, I didn't actually highlight that, but when I copied that cell, this comes to just barely over $40. And if I had put in the right formula here, so I'll go ahead and do now, and copied that down, it would change this from yes to no. Watch it happen. It's like magic. So with that boundary condition incorrect, we have this cascading error problem. So even though I submitted this with that error, we're able to look and give full credit on this particular assessment, this particular task. Because we're doing the grading on the student's machine while it's running, we can recalibrate the rubric on the fly. And we ask ourselves, what should be showing in that cell based on, at this moment, based on the antecedents, on all the values in the antecedent cells? And is that what is actually showing? So we say, yeah, your formula is showing the correct answer at that point. And so in terms of being able to automate specific feedback and partial credit, this is kind of where we are. Now, what I haven't shown you yet is information that we're collecting along the way. And this is the part that I think has the biggest implications for your group in terms of what research might be available to us here. There are several ways for us to get at this, but let me just come and look at it this way first. If, as a professor, if I have a hold of my student's file, either because that student emailed it to me or I downloaded it from the server, I can come through the submission process and I can say, yeah, don't give my student's credentials here. Instead, let me put in my credentials. I changed my password recently. I hope I remember it. I think that's right. So the very first thing that happens is that we make a round trip to the server and we ask, give us the rubric. But if it's a professor who's asked for the rubric, when the rubric comes back, it says, oh, you're the administrator, you get more options. And one of the things I can do is I can say, you know what, just grade the student's work right now so I can see how it would score if we were to submit it. Or I can grade this on the student's behalf. Or I can come down here and show the log. Now this log data is available from the server end as well, but let me just show it to you here. So there's some information about this file, who it was downloaded by. Here's the link that would take me directly to that student's submission for this assessment if I want to go and change the grade or whatever. But here's what the log looks like. There are several different kinds, this is a summary, there are several different kinds of data that we log. Let's look at this one. So one of the things we log is range modifications. And so here's the first, so this is the log that I just did. So today, 11/16, at 12:16 p.m., I made a change on the if functions worksheet. I changed the cell E18, and that's the formula that I put in there. Based on all the antecedent cells at that moment, that's the value that was displayed in that cell. And so I get this log down to the second of everything that the student did along the way. If they've done something that produces an error, then I see the error message that they got in that was showing in the cell right here in the value that's being displayed. We actually wrote this for the purpose of academic integrity. We wanted to be able to know when a student had copied somebody else's work. And so it's tough to tell, especially if the assignment is completely correct, if a file is a copy of another, because that's ultimately where we want every student to get. But if we could see what's happening along the way, then we get a fingerprint that is unique to this particular file. So if a student copies this file, or one of the things that happens, of course not our side, if a student would just take this work and say, you know what, I want to submit this as my buddy, it'll go through and do that whole grading thing, but we would like to be able to see that happened. Now, we won't course, we won't see that on the one that I just submitted, but let me go ahead and authenticate again as my professor self.
You got BYU.
Thank you. So again, we see all the range modifications, and the range modifications between those two submissions would be the same because I didn't change any ranges between those two submissions. But one of the other things that we look at is that we log our submissions. And so here is a submission that was made. Oh, here's the first submission that I made, that one that failed because I didn't have permissions where I actually had the file saved. I got partway through. And then here's the one that went through, and then here's the next submission that was made on behalf of Mick. So this was the origin of why we said we want to log all this stuff, is so that we can tell when students are cheating. When you've got 1,000 students working through it, you'd like to know when they're not doing their own work. And so we had to automate that process. But then we get this, we also get along this process data along the way. And so what this allows us to do is allows us to see, hey, what are students struggling with as they're working through here? So in fact, there have been 2 dissertations that have been done on this log data. Rob Nyland, do you guys know Rob? Yeah. So Rob was working with this data, and then John Chapman, which I think he's defending next week. Is that right? So next Monday. But it's like a wealth of data that we have access to here. Is a question? Go ahead.
I'm also working on it.
Oh, and you're working on it too? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So you may need some stuff. Let me know, and we'll get you what's not kind of all.
Actually, I do. I've noticed a couple things I need to ask you for.
Great. Yeah, I mean that's what I'm here for. So, kind of thinking about some of the things that I think would be really interesting to look at. That hopefully there's someone here who says, "Wow, that's something that we could look at," because we've got VBA running. We're logging this stuff while we're going. It would be a pretty simple matter for us to say, oh, we just saw you try something in this cell. We've got thousands upon thousands of people that have submitted responses to that cell, and we know what some common mistakes are. We might even know what some mind bugs. You use the term mind bug where you've thought about something wrong. That when we see you do that, we know you don't understand how to use a relative reference. And we can see that, and we can detect that immediately because we know specifically the task they are trying to solve when they put something there. And we can look across all the submissions that former students have made and say, aha, here's a common mistake that students make. Well, we can know that. We don't have to wait till they submit to see that. We can know that the very moment they first enter that common mistake. The interesting questions here that I think are, when is the right time to intervene? When's the right time to pop up some little message that says, we see you working on you just made a common mistake here. We're pretty sure that it's not the very moment they make that mistake, but we've looked at the logs and we've seen people work for like a half hour on one cell, trying all kinds of different things, and we can watch the path they go through, and we see their mistake is right here. The mistake is there from the very beginning, and they don't ever question whatever assumption led to that mistake, for a half hour later. And, maybe even, we can see that they went back and read the textbook and then came back and made a change, and it was still the wrong change that they're making. So we're pretty sure that the right time to intervene is not the very first time, and it's probably not waiting a half hour to intervene, but when's the right time to intervene? Now, of course, this is like an assessment. We're trying to see, do you really know what you're doing? Maybe we wouldn't intervene here, but we have those practice problems that they're working on. That's part of the process where it's their first time dipping their toe into this pool. When's the right time to intervene? Do any of you know the answer to that? It turns out the world does not know the answer to that. And that's what PhD students do. They figure out things that the world doesn't know. Let's answer it. So that's like, an idea that I thought of to do with this data. My hope is that you guys can look at this data and go, oh, wow, if you did it like this, then you could do, something else. You may have theories over here that I haven't even dreamed of that we could do with this stuff. Okay, that's kind of the high-level view of the system. What questions do you have? Any questions here? In the back.
So you showed us, you said one of the purposes for initially doing this was to prevent cheating, and then you showed us that you could look at the pattern that they followed. Maybe I missed it, but do you have Is there like some number that's generated or some kind of quick indicator that would allow a system to flag this student is too similar to this other student's
Yeah, let's take a look. So I'm going to open up a different browser to log in as my professor self and leave my student self logged in Chrome. We get to the right course. We have had the number lock on. 1139 AD. 1139 AD. That's like the identifier for this particular course. It's also the year that the Catholic Church made a prohibition against Christians using the crossbow against other Christians. That's what happened in. It's like the most significant thing I could find that happened in 1139. That's how I happen to remember that particular number. Okay, so here I'm going to come into, I got some tools now that are available to me that were not available elsewhere when I was a student. So I'm going to come to the assessments. I'm going to find that assessment, which is this one right here, test your skills for the logic and reference functions. I'll follow that link, and it will bring up then the students' submissions. And so let's take a look at this one. So here's the submission, a couple submissions that I made on behalf of Nick Ball. And it's kind of tough to see here. I got to work with the guys on the interface. They've got a dark red symbol against a dark blue background. That's probably not the best choice here. So this particular submission is flagged for 3 different things that look suspicious about it. So this is your question. How is this stuff flagged? And so let me just take a look at one of these. I'm going to follow this one that is the find uploaded files with copied cells. And you remember that I copied the cell, from my buddy Jacob's workbook and pasted it in one. So here then is this rule that's been violated. It's kind of this flag that's been set on this assessment. Find uploaded files with copied cells. And then here's the folks. Well, I made a couple of submissions, Nick made a couple of submissions, and Ellen made a submission here. Let's look at Nick's submission that he made today, 11/16, and we'll view the detail. So as we view that, we're looking at a submission that was made by Nick Ball. I mean, actually, it was made by me, but it was using his account, right? We used his credentials to log in. And it says, here's the amount matching accountability code. So this was a number that we found in the workbook that we did not expect to find in that workbook. That number belongs to Jacob Allred. Here's his email. He is a student at Utah Valley University. He's registered for a different course that uses this assignment. So this may not be a student of the professor, but these guys got together. There's 2 classes using the assignment. And then there's only one cell, but it says right here, it's on the if function worksheet, and there was one matching cell that was copied. How can this possibly happen? Of course, when we show students, that we caught them cheating this way, they think, how did you possibly know that? The answer is that when you copy a cell, you don't just copy the value that's in that cell, you copy the font, and you copy the background color, and you copy every characteristic of that cell, including the background pattern color. Did you know there's such a thing as the background pattern color? Very few people know that. I'll right-click this and come to Format Cells. There's this thing over here in Fill, and you can put a pattern style on the fill. You could put like a crosshatch pattern in the background of that cell. We used to do this all the time before we had color printers. Now we make cells different colors, but black and white, you've got to make cells look and put this pattern on the back. And so what we do when the student downloads the file, it looks like they're just downloading a regular Excel file. Oh no. On the way down, the server cracks that file open, and it sets the background pattern color on every cell that the student has to complete this assignment. That background pattern color is never displayed. The student never sees it unless they have set a background pattern. So it's invisible unless the pattern is there. And so what happens is during the submission process, we just look across all the cells that are part of this assignment, and we say what background pattern color do we expect to be there, and if we find someone different, then we flag it, and then that's what kind of triggers that particular flag that says, hey, this thing came from Jacob. Because it's a color, in Excel, the range is 1 to 16 million. And so we just assign a different color number to each student, and then we inject that into the cell, and so that's how we do it. Go ahead.
So if you wanted to beat the system without without typing it in yourself. What about that bar right up top when you click on the cell? Could you
Right
copy
here.
and paste that?
Yeah, so if I copied and pasted it here,
Sneaky.
that's exactly right. I wouldn't know that they had copied, because this brings only the text. Here's the thing though, I've got hundreds of cells that I've got to do this assessment. And the student that does that, the students that are copying this stuff, they're lazy. And so they're not going to do that. In fact, we could at the point of submission, we could say, yeah, you're not submitting this isn't your own work. We could prevent it from submitting. If you try to submit a workbook you didn't download, we could prevent the submission. We kind of went long and hard. We talked long and hard about what's the right way to handle this. And we decided, if we prevent every brand of cheating that we can detect, we're going to push cheating into areas that we can't detect. And so we say, let's kind of let the cheating come through and let the professor deal with it how they want to deal with it. Yeah, question.
There are a few questions.
We got questions from the remote audience.
Elizabeth likes what she sees, so not really a question.
Is that Christian Faulkner? Hold on a second. Is that?
Yes.
I don't recognize him. I know a guy named Christian Faulkner. He's like the young men's president in my ward. But someone else has a question. Go ahead. A real question.
But Donna wants to know if you can adopt this to use with Word.
Oh, so is this possible to use with Word? And the answer is yes. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Access. Here's the thing. This logging capability that we have is stronger in Excel than anywhere else. Because in Excel, we can actually trigger an event. Every time a cell changes, there's an event that we can say, aha, a cell changed, go do something. And so we can have that happen in the background. In Word, PowerPoint, and Access, there's no analogous thing that says this changed in a certain way, log it. So instead, what we do there is every minute, we kind of look across the document and we say a summary of what's happened in the last minute. So it's not nearly as precise as this. But if there was a particular research question that we were looking at, then we might be able to adapt that logging capability to say, well, what specifically do you want to look at in Word? And we will get modified.
Then Katie wants to know about what happens when students figure out the background color scheme.
So question, what happens when students figure out that whole background color scheme? And the answer is they move into other ways of cheating. And we've got several different ways that this is one of kind of a host of tools that we use to look at. One of the things that we haven't gone really deep into automating is that when someone is copying work, it's a very different workflow than when they're actually working through it. In other words, when you're copying it, you don't make any mistakes along the way. And so that would be kind of an automated flag that we could trigger. You know what? Here's someone who submitted the thing, didn't ever make a single mistake. The guy must be a genius. Oh, wait a minute, we have his pretest score. He's no genius. And so, we can automate those kinds of things, and we haven't done that yet. So yeah, so in fact, kind of on that topic, while I was developing these tools, we had a class with almost 3,000 students in it. So while I'm running the algorithms to go through these logs, I'm working on that particular class. And I'm finding, I was just looking, actually whole files that were copied from one student to another. And I kept getting this list that said there's 100 people that turned in copies of the same file. 100 people. Something wrong with my algorithm. When I checked it. Finally, I printed off the names of the students. And they were all from a common ethnic origin. And I went, oh, that's not a random mistake in my code. We really had 100 students. One of them downloaded it, and 100 of them turned it in. I called the professor. Bob, do you have a few minutes? We need to talk. And I explained this, and he was ready to curse my name, for telling him this. Why? Why would a professor be upset that I told him about this problem with cheating? Yep.
Then he has to do something about
Yeah,
it.
this is untold hours of work for him to deal with. By the end of the call, he was like, "Wait a minute, this is a huge problem. This is the business school's problem. I'm going to give it to the dean's office," which he did. And there was an associate dean there who took the ball and ran with it. That's a long story that I could tell you. There's interesting things. There was another question over here somewhere. Yeah.
So let's say you had this program and you wanted to teach like general chemistry, where you're still using a lot of formulas, a lot of equations, but you're not using all those Excel functions.
Yeah.
would it be an easy, in your mind, could it be an easy transfer over to some other subjects such as general chemistry?
So if I only knew something about general chemistry, I might be able to answer that question. So but here's the thing, what we need
Whatever.
is we need an environment that allows students to try something, see how it goes. Try it and see how it goes, try it and see how it goes. And as long as we've got an environment where they're saying, I'm going to try this, not what I'm after, try something else, not what I'm after, then we can log those steps along the way. And so, immediately if you could say, you know what, we're going to have you do your homework, your chemistry homework in Excel, then yeah, you could turn the key and you could have that happening next week, literally, next week we could do that. If it's a matter of kind of developing another environment that actually makes a little more sense for that domain, then it would take more time. But yeah, the key here is that there's some reason that a student says, right, the system, the Excel system gives them some level of feedback. It doesn't tell them if it's semantically correct, but it will tell them if it's syntactically correct. They type something incorrect here, and they may immediately get a syntax error. They can also kind of look at it and see, does this make sense given the rest of the upstream values? And so, as long as there's a process where it's not just, I'm going to make my best shot and there's no way for me to check it. It's kind of like writing an English paper. I'm going to write it out and there's no automated thing that looks at it and says, well, I guess there might be some grammar things and spelling, but as long as it's that iterative process, then we can do it. There's another question here?
Question from Zane.
Hello, Zane. Thanks for coming.
You can talk more about the ethical discussion that went into the decision to log their activity in the background.
Yeah, so there's and we log kind of crazy things too. I mean, it's not just activity. Let me show you. Yeah, I know this is. Yeah, this is a good question. There are real questions here. So let me just show this parameters. So when a student opens the workbook, so here's me opening this workbook on this machine. So 11:16, that's today at 12:06 or 12:11. Here's the full path that was opened. It was opened on a Windows machine, a Windows operating system. We dump off all the environment variables. This is all kind of specific information about this user's computer. What we're really after here is we're after the user's name that they're logged in with. And the reason is we'd like to know, is this going from machine, is this one file kind of going from machine, opened on another machine, opened on another machine? Because when we've got a file that's being copied around between 100 students, we'd kind of like to be able to see the path. What machines did it go to? So we put that. We want to know information about the network environment that they're configured on. Why? We would like to be able to tell when people are collaborating side by side but doing no digital sharing. We're logging all the times, and so we could know that they're doing their work at the same time. And if we know something about their network configuration, we can know that they're doing it in a geographically similar location. They're on the same subnet. They're at least at the same school. And so this information, which is the local IP address combined with the external IP address that they make with the submission, gives us that kind of information. So yeah, did we ask them for permission to log this kind of stuff? The answer is no. But Zane's question was, give us some insight into the ethical discussion that you had about this. That's easy. None. None is probably too stiff, but it wasn't much. It was like, we can do this, and we can tell when people are cheating because we're doing this. And, should we do it? Well, yes, that was about it. Yeah, should we do this? Well, yes, we should. Do I recognize that there are kind of ethical questions here that we probably should be looking at? Yeah. Thank you, Zane. That's a great question. We haven't done it. Other questions from the remote viewers? No? Other questions here? Yeah.
So when you do discover that there's been a file that's been passed around, you have to go in and remake the assignment, go in, I wonder what that process is like. Do you create it? Do you have, and how long does it take with the My Educator system to get that all set up? Is it just a matter of building the file again, or do you edit a couple little things? Yeah,
so the question is, let's suppose we got a file that was kind of copied around. What do we have to do about that? And there's really kind of two separate questions here. One is, has the file kind of been shared broadly such that, it's kind of now, almost have to think of that as a public domain assignment. And if that's the case, then yeah, you're right. That assignment now becomes, we say, it's lost its value for assessment purposes. And so we have to come up with a different context, and we make a whole new assessment. It takes about a day to say, you know what, I want to make an assignment. It really is about 8 hours. This is a good assignment that kind of evaluates this stuff. It takes about another day to code the rules, to say now we're going to tell when this thing is right and wrong, and then upload it, and it can be, so it can be, within a week, you can have a new assessment up there. But yeah, that's kind of part of what the whole system is doing, is they're constantly saying, all right, we've got new assessments that are coming in, the other ones are kind of rolling off, and we might mothball those for a number of years and then bring them back in some slightly varied version. But just because a file has been shared out there, we get so much information about kind of on the inside of that file. Okay, let's see, am I editing this down here?
I have another question from online viewer.
Question from the online viewer. Be with you in just a second. So let me just kind of show the properties here. So this is not log, but these are like property things. So here's the accountability ID. So this is that code that's injected into the workbook. We know who downloaded the workbook, various other things here, when it was downloaded. This is actually a timestamp from when the file was downloaded. So just because a file has been shared from one place to another doesn't necessarily say we've got to throw away that assignment, because we know the history of where that file came from, and if you submit a file that you didn't download, it came from somewhere else, that can be, depending on the class policy, could be an instance of academic dishonesty. So just because it's been shared doesn't mean we got to throw it out. But if it does get out there publicly, then they kind of have a useful life, and then we kind of have to retire them. Question from the remote group: where are these remote people anyway? All over the world.
The question is, you spoke about adding different courses and what was involved in doing that, but how about scalability and just expanding current courses? Could you talk more to the process or the ramifications of that, costs involved, or the effort that it would take to expand to this, to other universities or other?
Okay, so the question's a question of scale. I'll address scale in kind of two different dimensions. So one is, if we're going to different universities. The answer is there is no cost there. I mean, that's what my educator does. It's currently, just this Excel book is currently adopted at about 30 universities. About 15,000 students a year go through this, which means we have crazy amounts of log data that is kind of available for analysis. And so going to other schools, not a problem. Going to larger classes, not a problem. The whole architecture of it allows it to scale large. Now, saying we want more content, that is a different question altogether. So saying we only have 4 chapters in Microsoft Access. Well, what if we want to extend that out? That's a really creative process. We've got to have somebody write the chapter, screenshots and videos, and then write the assessments that go with it. So these 4 chapters were really like a semester of nights. I mean, so kind of working after hours. So we've got a semester to write these 4 chapters with all of the assessments and all of the. So saying I want to bring in more content, that is not a trivial matter. Did that answer the scale question?
Okay, Dr. Allen, we want to thank you for your.
All right, I guess that's the end.
We have to end, but let's give Dr. Allen a round of applause.